Hi everyone, welcome to Breadonomics. This video is about report writing. Report writing is challenging. Through this video, I'd like to set out some steps for you in how you can develop a simple structure for writing economics reports for year 11 and 12. We often spend a lot of time doing all our research, getting all our information, and then it can be really hard to figure out how it all fits together and how it helps us to come up with a final judgment, final decision. So sit back, get your notebooks ready to take some notes as we go, and enjoy. The second phase of your report writing is getting some understanding of the individual sections of reports and understanding how they connect. These three sections I call the comprehend or the comprehension section of your report, your knowledge and understanding. It often includes your economic theory also. The analyze section, where you unpack the data, where you demonstrate high quality research from primary and secondary sources, and you start to consider the implications of changes. And thirdly, the evaluate, where we tie together our paper, we balance our positives and negatives, we consider short-run cyclical versus long-run structural elements also. Let's now look at each of these sections in a bit more detail. The first section of the report will be the comprehension, sometimes referred to as a background section. Here are my tips. Start off by examining the economic issue or the problem. Develop from that a rationale for change in government policy. Here is where you get specific about the actual policy and the actual changes implemented. For example, if you're writing a report around free trade agreements and tariffs, this is where I would be outlining some of the critical changes to tariffs that will then constitute sections of your analysis. And thirdly, reflect upon and discuss the relevant and significant economic theory. Economic theory helps us understand why the government has undertaken the economic reforms it has. Economic theory also helps us to predict outcomes. Our next section of the report is the analysis. And this is where we have to undertake considerable deep research, looking at both primary and secondary data sources. Read widely. Once you find critical elements to start to analyse, read deeply around those issues. We often think about in economics the concept of cause and effect. From a cause perspective, the reform in government policy or the change that has occurred that was outlined in your previous section leads to a certain number of effects. And we have to think about where those effects might occur. It's really critical in economics to think about the broader implications for society and to link that back to what we'll call stakeholder groups. We refer to them as household, firms, and governments. At this moment, have a reflection upon your understanding of the circular flow model, because that will help you to understand this next section I'm talking to. Any change in policy is going to have effects on households. It may affect income or it may affect consumption. Remember that in the circular flow, income is Y, consumption is C. Secondly, firms. Any change in policy may affect the cost structure for firms in terms of production, and it may also influence their earnings. And thirdly, governments. Changes in policy will often influence revenue, which we refer to as taxation in the circular flow model, and also government expenditure. From this perspective, we can start to establish whether the effects of a change are having an expansionary or a contractionary effect on the level of economic activity. To prosecute this analysis further and to get into some deeper understanding, you can then consider the outcomes on our macro indicators: GDP or aggregate demand, inflation and employment. For example, an increase in employment or a decrease in the unemployment rate will likely lead to higher national incomes, which will lead to higher levels of consumption, which should in turn increase the level of aggregate demand in society, where C is one of the functions in the AD formula. When we think through that process and we reflect on things like, for instance, government policy during, say, COVID, 2020, 2021, etc., we can get an understanding that certain reforms will have broader implications across society. So when we analyse, we'd like to look at often longitudinal data or time series data over a number of years, and specifically start to reflect on those households, firms and governments. Begin to create your own sort of judgments about who is winning and who is losing at each stage of the process. And talk through to your macro indicators, especially around GDP, inflation, and employment or unemployment data. The final stage of our report is to create an evaluation. In doing this, we're trying to reach a balanced and final judgment, and we have to support this judgment with logical reasons that are drawn from our own analysis. We're creating arguments from our own analysis. To help you do that, I'd consider examining the positive and negative implications, like a pros and cons chart, for the different stakeholder groups. I'd also want to think about the cyclical or the short run, like the short term sort of stuff, or the structural or long run effects. For instance, a policy that might give some pain to some groups in the short run may end up being advantageous in the long run. And finally, I'd want to think about the significance of any of these policy changes, these reforms, on those macro indicators of GDP, inflation and unemployment. Pulling together all those arguments, trying to look at the complex and multifaceted nature of the analysis that you've undertaken to bring you to a balanced and final conclusion is the essence of persuasive writing. So there you have it. That's a pretty simple structure to help you create some cohesion and some strategy in how to set out your economics report. Hopefully it leads you to create a very logical and persuasive final judgment, and that you feel that you really understand the entire context and the complexity of the economic issue that you've unpacked. Keep an eye out for upcoming videos where I'll use this structure to unpack a made-up question about Donald Trump 1.0, as well as some other videos on creating intention with writing, and also how to use technology to ease the burden on the brain and the fingers. If you like this video, please leave a comment below, pass it on to your friends. Hopefully the stuff I'm producing is helpful to you. Also keep an eye on the website, breadonomics.com, for more sort of text-based work as well. And send me an email if you have any other further questions at breadonomics@gmail.com. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great day. Bye.